The Africa reel which most beckons to be created, and yet which most eludes me, is about hospitality. My conscience won't rest until I've expressed my gratitude, yet I'm at a loss as to how to limit that to the short video format of my series. Several weeks before our trip, I had started locating future hosts through Couchsurfing.com. Ras Kawinseb, supposed to be our very first host in Ethiopia, was a friend of a friend, however. We landed in Addis Ababa before 5 a.m. on a Friday. Our vague plans of heading straight to Ras, in a town in the south, dissolved when we found out he wouldn't be there till Sunday. We tried a few hostels, but they were booked or very expensive. Around 6 a.m. I relented and called Eskadar, a girl I had contacted through Couchsurfing. I woke her up, but she wasn't upset. "Come over," she said, though there were 2 couchsurfers already staying by her. The cab driver, according to her directions, took us to the Gofa Project's Block 3 and said he'd wait in case we decided we wanted to go back. This says something about the neighborhood, or his expectations of white tourists, I guess. But as soon as I saw Eskadar, leaning over the stairwell balcony, I sent the driver away. Her apartment, really a 10-foot by 30-foot studio, was in no way discordant with the third world outside which I was experiencing for the first time. There was indeed a Russian couple just getting out of bed, but luckily they surprised Eskadar by packing up to go after a 9-day stay. It was unclear where Eskadar herself stayed all this time, but I think it was with her mother. The couple gave Eskadar her key, and she handed it over to us. Her younger brother, Dagum, then helped us acquire a cell phone and SIM card, vouching with his own ID number and photo, and took us to his mother's place to eat. We could hardly believe that just a few hours after landing in a foreign continent, we were being served a homemade Ethiopian meal. The next night she took us out dancing with her friends. When we were finished, 6 of us piled into a cab together. 3 of Eskadar's friends insisted on crashing at her place, despite her half-serious protests. Yosee and I were slightly concerned about the logistics of this, but this proved petty when Eskadar delegated her bed to the 2 of us, though it could have fit 3. She and her friends insisted on sleeping on the floor. When Eskadar had given us her key, I had asked her if she always placed such trust in strangers. She said she had hosted about 50 before us and never had a problem. Next, we were to meet Ras, who had spent the weekend in Addis, and travel with him by bus to Shashamene. I knew I should expect a Rastafarian, but I didn't expect one with a white beard, walking barefoot on the rubble of the supremely inhospitable Kaladi bus station. Originally from Aruba by way of Canada and the UK, he had been walking thus since the airport from where he repatriated to Ethiopia 15 years ago. After the 4-hour bus ride, he walked us through the dark to his little estate. A small boy ran up to greet us and helped me take my things inside. He was Adam, Ras's middle child. The other 2 were Bethlehem and Aiden. Ras's wife, Tariqua, was domestic and timid, until the first private conversation I had with her. Ras, who was away most weekends, gave each of his children a drawing pad, and they took turns shaking his hand. I had never before seen, in person, such an authentic display of filial respect. Ras was a wellspring of knowledge for us about Rastafari and the sacredness of Ethiopia. He had named his estate Moblisa Mesk, or Pleasant Pastures in Amharic, a phrase from Psalms. His words had power over us, in spite of any conflicts they posed with the loyalties of our religion. For his part, Ras was very curious about Judaism and eager to learn what we could teach him about the Bible and Psalms in the original Hebrew. For a humble fee, he put us up in a mud hut he had built by hand, and in which Adam usually slept. In the house, besides one bedroom, there was just one other bed in the kitchen, so I'm not sure where the whole family slept when Yosee and I took the hut, but in time we would get used to the self-sacrifice of our hosts. Our next one took us in like puppies wet from the rain. When leaving the house in Addis the night before to wait for the bus that was to take us north to Bahir Dar, a vagrant had attacked Yosee for his iPhone. In the scuffle, Yosee's hand was cut, and the mugger ran off only after he had grabbed our cheap Nokia. When the driver finally arrived, he was rather annoyed at the inconvenience we posed, But God sent a man in the next batch of passengers who insisted the van take us to the hospital and wait while Yosee was treated. The next day, when we finally got to our host, Yordanos, she lent a sympathetic ear. We were impressed by her immediately. She had taken up making wine out of various fruits, and at 25 years old, was running a wine bar in front of her house. Typical of Ethiopians, Yordi lived with her whole family, but in a sort of modern twist on the traditional household, she employed them all. Yordi spoke great English, but the same was not true for the others. However, they took us in as if it was the most natural thing in the world. And I guess it was, since by Yordanos' estimate she had hosted 300 couch surfers. Her mother had died at childbirth. He was still caring for her elderly father. The only words he spoke in English were, "Thank you, very good," which did wonders for our self-satisfaction. We extended our stay with Yordi by another day, and then two, to celebrate her birthday.
Delicious hummus, ever.
And generally to prolong the intimacy of family. Our next host in Gondar was, I'm sorry to say, an exception to the rule I've presented. It soon became obvious to us he was trying to use couch surfing to do business, trying to influence our touristic decisions to his benefit. On the other hand, his neighbor, to whom he brought us for a meal when we first arrived, was very kind and searched me out to say goodbye at the end of our stay. Our intended host in Mali never responded to my messages when the date of the flight from Ethiopia arrived, so the day before the flight I sent host requests to several others in Bamako, and a man named Laurent invited me by the time Yosee and I got to the airport. Yosee and I were bumped up to business class, quite by chance, so we were expecting a rough landing in a country considered one of the world's poorest. We were in for a surprise when Laurent came for us in his white Toyota pickup. It was his company car and the first private car we rode in Africa. I had not known who Laurent was. I wasn't even sure if he was white. But fate wanted us to enjoy the fruits of Caterpillar's endeavors in Mali. Laurent had a boy who opened his garage door for him and a woman who cooked and cleaned for him in the mornings. We had our own room and bathroom with running water, hot if we wanted. Winding up by Laurent almost felt like cheating. It was too comfortable for Africa's poorest country. At a party with his friends, other French workers and volunteers, we were greeted by a counter of hors d'oeuvres and alcohol, and they readily spoke English for us. Now I just need somebody to say where in Mali so that I know. I asked Laurent's friends about their social relations with the Malians. They explained that they found it hard to connect for several reasons, including a disparity in education and social openness. Laurent was so overwhelmingly accommodating, spending his lunch breaks with us and taking us to see whatever he considered worth doing in Bamako, that we could only thank our lucky stars. When we left his home 3 days later, he checked in regularly to see that we were okay. When Yosee and I decided to buy flights to Ghana, he purchased them himself, since we couldn't do it over the internet. He simply trusted us to pay him back one day. We had our next couchsurfing hosts in Segu, a lazy fishing village on the Niger. They were also Caucasians, pointing to the relative prevalence of whites on the internet in Mali compared with locals. Arthur was working in Bamako when we were scheduled to arrive, but he put us in touch with his girlfriend, Elise. When she came to meet our cab, she was helmeted and on a moped. She struck me as being completely in her element. She had once lived for a while in Mali, but now she was just spending her vacation with her boyfriend, and rather dreading going back home to Canada, where she was preparing for her GRE. I still had not eaten local Malian food, so she took us to a joint where a plate of rice with fish and peanut sauce cost the equivalent of 50 cents, and when Yosee pointed out a fly in the food, the bow-tied waiter picked it out of his plate. Later, Elise met us at the river and introduced us to her friend Mamadou, a pinnace builder. 2 of his brothers had died very recently, and Arthur had loaned him money for the funeral. Later that evening, she told us of a Malian friend of hers who had given birth prematurely. Elise had visited the baby in the hospital, and the doctor apathetically noted that the baby was still alive, but he didn't intend to feed it because the parents didn't have money. Elise made a deal with Arthur that she called the blackberry for baby milk deal. She had lost her blackberry a while before, but Arthur wouldn't have to buy her a new one if he let her instead use the money for her friend's baby milk. We had dinner at the restaurant she was most loyal to, Chez Bouakar. Her regular joke with Buakar was to ask what he had for dessert. He never had dessert. Elise clarified why foreigners in Mali feel they can't be true friends with the locals. It wasn't the educational or social disparity as much as the economic disparity. Such individuals felt the Malians always wanted something from them. I identified. Yosee and I felt we were seen as walking dollar bills, so we always maintained a degree of suspicion towards anyone who approached us. But Elise made an interesting point, that these financial expectations were not just from Malians towards whites. Within their own society, Malians expected those with means to help those without, whether it be paying for an uncle's medicines, a sister's school tuition, or just stuff for friends. No one is ever given the chance to hoard money. This admittedly beautiful paradigm was one that Elise chose to participate in, rather than avoid. Our next host was not through couch surfing, but through a commercial transaction. Musa, a Tuareg who sold jewelry in the touristy strip, invited me to have tea with him and his friend Abu. I was concerned about the security situation up north, where I was heading for a music festival, so he invited us to travel with him and stay in his house in Timbuktu. All along I was torn between trust and suspicion towards Musa, since I understood the Tuaregs were implicated in the security threat. However, I set my doubts aside with my bags in Musa's home. He was unmarried, but the house he built housed his sister, sister-in-law, and others who I wasn't sure how they were related. Yosee and I slept in one of the 2 rooms, leaving me again to wonder where the other 6 or 7 passed the night. Musa, whose parents still lived nomadically in the desert, was the de facto paterfamilias. He had business sense, profiting enough from his jewelry to buy a piece of land in Timbuktu and give his family an estate. They owed a lot to him, and their respect was palpable. Back in Bamako, Laurent happily took us in again, and Yosee got the night of poker and pizza he had been craving for over a month. Laurent and I exchanged plane tickets, money, and gifts. Our host in Accra, Ghana, was another foreigner, but this time from Pakistan, so over the course of the 6 days we spent by him in total, we had a different cultural immersion from the one we'd expected. Saeem worked for MTN, a foreign communications company in Ghana, sacrificing family and cultural preference for career and savings. The room and board were lavish by the standards of a developing country. He was somewhat of a foodie, and he freely indulged us in hand-ground coffee, sweets from Pakistan, and the Pakistani food his Ghanaian housekeeper learned to cook. Inviting us into the Pakistani Indian community in Accra, he took us out to the beach, a barbecue, clubs, billiards. We shared a Sabbath dinner, smoked joints, and discussed Judaism and Islam. Yosee and I were blessed with an experience that was unlikely in the political realities of our countries. It's just that I had that internal conversation again, about whether I was experiencing the authentic Ghana. At our next home, I traded in that dilemma along with the physical comforts of Saeem's hospitality. I had sent messages to several couchsurfing hosts in Kumasi, and Ebenezer was the first to invite us, so I trusted fate and accepted. We did have second thoughts when we first arrived in his home. He was living off a meager salary as a teacher in a Catholic school. He rented a 1-room apartment with a curtain dividing the bed from the living room. All cooking was done on the porch on coals and a gas stove. The bathroom was a public toilet, which cost about 15 cents to use. By the second day, the septic tank had filled up, and for the few days it took till it was emptied, our alternative was a cheaper public toilet, where you got newspapers instead of toilet paper, and most stalls had no doors. Despite these details, though, almost immediately Yosee and I felt at home. For the first few hours we did most of our talking with Ebenezer's friend, William, a sharply dressed radio pundit and conductor of their church choir. We quickly fell in love with Ebenezer, though. The purity of his soul shone through from the first bagged water he gave us from his mini-fridge. He enlisted William to take us touring while he was at school, and he and William's fiancée cooked for us at night. Once again, our concerns about being cramped were unnecessary, since Ebenezer insisted we sleep in his bed, as he took the couch. When we parted on the 4th day, we had a couch surfing first. Our host cried. We moved on to Cape Coast, where Achu was to host us. He was also a teacher and still at work when we arrived. He dispatched his sister Mary, who we later understood was not literally his sister, to meet us. Achu came a while later and we ate together, talking about his goal of running an organization for the promotion of French across West Africa. In many ways, I could tell Achu was somewhat exceptional for his society. He was career-oriented and unconcerned about the opinions of those around him, such as what they might say about his relationship with a divorced mother of two. All the same, it seemed he was taking care of his family, since his father had passed away a year ago, and his mother was gone. I couldn't tell where exactly. His younger brother, Frank, had to become a little man himself, and I woke up one morning to see him ironing the school uniforms of some kids who I presume were cousins. Though Achu brought us, we were in fact guests of the entire complex, a 2-story building with a sort of courtyard in the center, occupied by a well and surrounded by buckets. Achu told me the residents used to pay for piped water, but since some paid and others didn't want to, everyone eventually threw up their hands. For a year now, they'd been drawing water for their baths, laundry, dishes, and cooking from the well. Yosee and I were always graciously provided with water for our baths. Every room was inhabited by family. No explanations as to their exact relations were ever given. One of the women fixed a dress I had tailored for my mother. She became a warm friend to me. 2 grandmothers were usually in the yard working. Children were always playing. Fish sauce was usually being cooked on coals to be eaten with bankum or fufu. There was action when we went to sleep at night, and action before we woke up in the morning. We could not stay detached from any of these people, nor were they content to leave me untouched, but engaged with me on their terms. Mary insisted on doing my laundry. When I protested and tried doing it myself, she sharply criticized my technique and tried to teach me how to do it properly. When I explained that in my country we do it by machine, the women mockingly repeated to each other, "She uses a machine." Yosee and I were invited to the funeral of the husband of one of the women. I was stopped from going to the burial in jeans and a black top, as I had to the wake. Instead, the deceased's daughter, who turned out not to be his literal daughter, gave me her dress, which looked like it was tailored for me. I was even encouraged to take Mustafa, one of the cousins, as my husband. I politely declined, explaining I need a Jewish man, like a tribal thing, but I still felt I had gained a family in Cape Coast. Our host in Keita, the other end of Ghana's coast, was a relative of Achu, with whom he had put us in contact. Jonas ran a bar called the Reggae Spot, but he preferred to stay in his abode on the beach near the fishermen. We were given the option of sleeping above the Reggae Spot, which was the home of John, the chief, or Togbi, a gentle and wise man who had worked most of his life in the prison system in New York. Only by the grace of Social Security could he afford to be chief over his hometown, a non-paying and often philanthropic position. So again we had a bedroom and bathroom, though this time with water that was brought to us in buckets. In Keita too, I had a sister who took care of me, Hannah. Since I couldn't stand idly by while I was served, I gravitated toward the kitchen with her and her mother, where I tried to help and learn a little Ewe. She prepared for us the best Ghanaian meal we ate. She told me she was 29, and I asked why she wasn't married yet. She had fibroids, she shared, and needed to have surgery first. I recalled what Elise had taught me. There was something very familiar about Jonas, like reggae itself, or like a doting godfather in retirement. We were treated with respect worthy of foreign dignitaries. Our peers, Angel and Sango, became our servers at breakfast time, and Jonas's friends came to chat with us about Israel. But all of this bespoke Jonas's authority in his corner of Ghana, and his kindness towards us. On the way to the market on our last day in Keita, I gave Hannah money for her surgery. I wanted to give Jonas a gift, but I figured it was the same thing, in a place where everyone is their brother's keeper. We returned to Accra before our flight back to Israel, and were warmly welcomed back by Saeem. I told him about our hosts, and their profound generosity towards us. Saeem, who put us first till the very end of our journey, encouraged me to look at it this way. If we were so blessed to be taken in by angels all along the way, perhaps we had deserved it on some cosmic level. I will probably never have the chance to pay back any of my hosts, but they have certainly taught me how to pay it forward.